Hi. This is
Hey
just
everyone.
audio, right? No video.
Oh, this is video too.
This is video too.
Oh yeah.
Oh, oh, it's a video cast. Here, let me make a fun background.
Okay. Take your time.
There we go.
Nice. Well, everyone, this is Robert, and thank you for tuning in to the podcast. And today we have Mr. Jake Friedman or Friedman here today. Like I
Friedman.
Friedman. Okay.
Friedman. Yeah.
Alrighty. We have Jake here, so thank you for joining me today. And yeah, we got some interesting topics to discuss about on this lovely Thursday afternoon. So let's get right to this. Well, first off, how have you been? Like, how is this, like, I guess, new, like, I don't know, pandemic or COVID lifestyle treating you? And what have you been up to as of late? Yeah, just share a little bit more about yourself, if you may.
Well, COVID has been not so uh horrendous for me because it gave me a chance to bond with my wife and it strengthened our relationship. We had a COVID romance and we got married during the pandemic, and um we are both very fortunate that we had a chance to have our love blossom during this otherwise really awful and confusing time. So we kind of surfed that wave with love. And we're going into 1 year, 7 months of married bliss.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I was looking at your website and I was just checking out a lot of the work that you've done, and I it is really interesting because I actually just spoke with Jerry Beck, which you can check
Hmm.
out the podcast on my YouTube channel, and you're also based in New York, so that is very fascinating. I just wanted to ask you, how is the like how would you describe like how it's like growing up being in the Big Apple and just being raised in New York? Were you always somebody who is like, hey, I want to be an author or like a researcher or like, yeah, how would you describe your childhood and how did you get started in this whole like um crazy business, so to speak?
Well, I was raised in the suburbs outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania,
Okay.
and my parents were both school teachers and part of the teachers union, the same teachers union. They had the same employer, that employer being the Philadelphia School District. And they would come home talking about uh, work and mentioning the union in passing. And my two brothers and I kind of grew up knowing that a union is just part of what you do when you're a Philadelphia school teacher or other professions as well. And I think it was because my parents were teachers and I was going to elementary school where there are teachers that I understood that there was a behind the scenes world that my teachers in elementary school had, like they were human and this was a job for them. I don't know if everyone who I went to school with perceived that, had that perspective of the teachers rather than just being authority figures, or they thought maybe the role was who they are. And I saw it just as a job and they had lives behind that job. And I kind of loved cartoons. And I think that's why I loved the behind the scenes stories of cartoons. I saw the people who made the cartoons as like going home and having lives and like sitting with their families and maybe being part of work conversations. So yeah, growing up loving Disney cartoons and loving the Disney parks and loving Warner Brothers cartoons, just loving cartoons. Uh, I wanted to know who made them and how that was like for them. So I read all the books I could back in the I'm going to say early 90s. There weren't that many books back then, but I gobbled them up. And I came to New York in 2001 to study film at NYU Film School, to study under John Canemaker and John Culhane. Both of those guys, the names kept coming up in the books that I had. I had John Culhane's amazing book called Aladdin, The Making of an Animated Film. And at the time, it was definitely like one of my favorite movies when I was 12, when it just came out. And John Canemaker, he had quotes that were peppered all over these books that I had. I think one big book was a book by an author named John Grant called The Encyclopedia of Disney Animated Characters. So John Kingmaker is all over that book, talking about the artists behind the characters or behind the scenes. So that's why I went to NYU, and I've been in New York City ever since.
Nice. So let me backtrack a little bit. So you went to New York in 2001 and you studied with John Kingmaker and, John Collane. And yeah, I mean, there's not really much to say about, these two masters. But I was kind of curious, like, what was the first cartoon that you ever watched? Or like, what was your first actual exposure to like animation?
Oh, I don't know. It's like saying what was the first brand of diapers I ever wore. I don't know. We have a home movie, not home video, but movie, like Super 8 movie of me watching Tom and Jerry on TV.
Yeah.
It was definitely the old school golden age cartoons, the Tom and Jerry cartoons, the Bugs Bunny cartoons, the Disney cartoons. My
Yeah.
my parents subscribed to uh the Disney Channel when it was brand new, back when it had a the before it. Now it's just Disney Channel, right? But the Disney
Yeah,
Channel,
it's just Disney Channel.
right? The Disney Channel had blocks of classic cartoons, and my parents would tape them. We had a VCR, early 80s VCR. We did not grow up affluent, but we were the only people on the block who had the Disney Channel and a VCR for some reason. And so my dad just taped all these cartoons, and he would put them on as a means to entertain us, and probably keep my two brothers and me quiet when my parents wanted to go and do their thing. And it was great. It was great. I grew up watching all those classic Disney cartoons and the Disney films. And um I always feel connected in a deep way to those like golden age, like 1930s and 40s and like early 50s cartoons, American cartoons.
Yeah. Do you remember which one? Okay, so let me kind of rephrase that, not the first one, but which was it? Like, what was the cartoon that really was like, oh wow, this is amazing. This is what animation can really do. Like, I kind of really love this. So, what was the one, like, I guess, short or anything that really comes to mind that just really left, like, an emotional, like, kind of impact on you? That which was the one that kind of was like, oh my gosh, this is definitely for me. What
Little
was the short that
Mermaid.
kind of changed your mind? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was it. Because I knew what Disney could be because I'd seen the classic films. And I knew what Disney was in those early 80s because we went to see The Great Mouse Detective and Oliver and Company and also the Don Bluth films. And I knew that there was something from the classic days that hadn't quite been recaptured. And I was 8 years old seeing The Little Mermaid with my jaw dropping and crying out of joy, saying, "Oh my God, they did it." They captured the magic.
Yeah, so that was kind of like a life-changing, moment for you.
Right.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember which one, what was the short for me, or which cartoon. Actually, I think it was. I mean, growing up, I was just watching like a lot of like Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon stuff. And then I would watch like the classic, the old like Warner Brothers shorts that came on Cartoon Network. And I think the one that kind
Yeah.
of really left like an impact on me was the works of Chuck Jones, Duck and Bug, One Frog Evening, Duck Dodgers, What's Upper Dog, that stuff. So I think that was like, okay, maybe this just shows that you can be funny, but you can also like, really treat animation like an art form, like really give it the respect that it definitely deserves. And the Disney cartoons, like the Disney movies, Fantasia, Pinocchio, those are also like the big ones for me too. I just really loved watching them as a kid, and I still do now. I mean, like, I wouldn't have all these like posters or just stuff just littered around in my room if it wasn't for just like, animation kind of really did change my life. So I'm just really glad to, talk to so many people that actually work in the business and people that are in the industry to offer their insight and reading animation books. And it was, oh, and also Tex Avery. I got to mention him too. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, the MGM cartoons and, that stuff. Like earlier, you mentioned Tom and Jerry and Tex Avery and that stuff. So yeah, I got to mention that as well. So, um, anyways,
Yeah, those shows were on when I was in
oh
college,
yeah,
when Cartoon Network had a block, the Chuck Jones show, the Bob Clampett show, the Tex Avery show. I
oh
thought this is
yeah,
great. Toonheads. I thought this is so great. I
yeah,
was so proud to be a human. I was like, whoever is cultivating these and curating these cartoons, mostly it was Jerry Beck, actually, at least for the Toonheads.
yeah.
They're doing such a service for the wider audience out there to let people of today's age back then grow up on these classic cartoons.
Yeah, self plug. Watch the Jerry Beck interview on YouTube. Just go to my channel. Okay, self plug over.
Yes, Jerry Beck's awesome.
Yeah, he really is. So fast forwarding to like a few years later, because you're a writer, teacher, and artist. What do you really enjoy the most out of your profession?
Um, they each appeal to a different facet, I guess, a different thing that I like to do. When I like talking to people and learning from other people and seeing that those sparks of understanding happen, that's when teaching really inspires me. Teaching at NYU, teaching at the Fashion Institute of Technology, teaching at Rhode Island School of Design, all animation history. I've taught art history before elsewhere, but teaching animation history is something that brings me such joy. And learning from what students bring to the table, because I've been introduced to some of my favorite pieces of animation because of the students. Things like Over the Garden Wall, things like Steven Universe. I'm like, these are pieces of animation that students have brought to class and did presentations on. I'm like, I'm going to check this out. And it's changed my life. I'm such a huge fan of some of these newer programs now.
Yeah.
So that's that. And when I want to dive in and be an investigative journalist, that's when writing scratches that itch because I really like telling the untold story of things.
Oh, totally.
Hence,
Um,
hence this book, The Disney Revolt.
Yeah, which we'll definitely get into in just a moment. But when you really look at shows like going into the 2010s, because I know that students of animation, like when they go to CalArts, they made a lot of revolutionary shows that really paved the way for future artists, animators. There's a lot more diversity, more groundbreaking just with the style of storytelling that's been seen on a lot of Cartoon Network shows, many Disney shows that you see now. And like, if we were to go back like a decade ago, when we got like Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, Steven Universe,
Mm-hmm.
regular show, so on and so
Regular show.
forth. Yeah,
Yeah.
those were, oh yeah, yeah, man. And even though that most of the programs are unfortunately like, they've ended their run, like you can still tell that the impact of those shows and the influence, it's still felt to this very day. Like, I don't even know where animation would really be if it wasn't for Adventure Time. And even before that, if we were to go, back to the 90s when we had shows like, Simpsons or Beavis and Butthead, Ren and Stimpy, SpongeBob,
Mm-hmm.
Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Lab.
Mm-hmm.
And I just talked to, also, I'm going to self plug here again, Fred Seibert, who,
Yeah.
him as for like what a cartoon. Oh yeah,
Sure.
cartoons. MTV and all that stuff. Like
Yeah.
he kind of
Fairly
gave a
Odd
lot
Parents,
of,
Chalk Zone.
yeah, all of those shows. Like he gave a lot of creators like creator driven shows that are just like you can get any of this stuff like back in the 70s or like 60s, 80s,
Mm-hmm.
like when animation was kind of considered to be like something that you can make like toys out of. Like it was kind of considered to be like a, it was not in a really good place. Like people considered it to be a dying art until like, mid 80s when Disney was making like, with their movies, like they were starting to climb out of their doldrums, with like The Little Mermaid and the Disney Renaissance and their TV, with their cartoons that they were doing at the time. So it was just kind of really fascinating when you look at the history of this. Like when you see the rise of, a company, like when you see the rise of Disney, when you see the downfall, and then they climb back up. So it's
Mhm.
just really fascinating. And that's where people like you come in. So, yeah, you've also contributed to like Animation Magazine and also written for countless, magazines over the years, and you've actually worked with Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, and Saturday Night Live, which
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
honestly can't believe it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I worked
yeah.
in animation. I was an animation artist myself, working
Oh
on
yeah,
shows
how was that?
in a hmm?
Yeah, how was that experience? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, it was fun. Definitely fun. That it was a great it's really cool to work in a studio and then understand what it's like for that culture. It's a culture when you're working in a studio with other creative people who are all zany to some degree and all have their own stories to share. There's something really cool and something that harkens back to those bygone ages of Termite Terrace and like Hyperion Avenue, the early animation studios that like, oh, now I understand the culture of what those places must have been like, what those studios were back in the 30s or 40s. And I begin to sort of like time travel the way I always want to as a writer, to put myself in that place and time. So working in modern animation studios was a great way to do that.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think we kind of stalled for long enough, but let's talk about the Disney Revolt. Oh yes. Oh man.
There we go.
So it's gonna be like, this is the time where we get to talk about a crucial moment in the Disney studio history. So let's talk about this infamous strike that happened in 1941,
Mm,
which is, you know, it has gone down in the books as something that significantly impacted the studio's history. I mean, at least in Walt's lifetime. So yeah,
mhm.
let's talk about it. Like, let's discuss about the Disney Revolt and the amount of research that went into it and just background. Yeah, just share a little bit about the book if you may.
Well, okay. Well, kudos to the Disney studio and to the Disney family for being open to even to acknowledge its existence. Because if you go to the Disney Family Museum in San Francisco, there's a permanent exhibit on the strike right there on the second floor. If you open some books published by Disney Editions or their imprints, you'll find, info or chapters about, not really chapters, but maybe like a chapter about the Disney strike of 1941. It's definitely not one of the happiest times, and maybe that's why it hasn't been talked openly by the studio or the family until like the last 15 years or so. And it's also not a very simple issue either. So I wanted to unravel all of the knots about how this happened. What happened on May 28th, 1941 is 320-ish animation artists walked out the doors demanding a union, a labor union, and they picketed for 9 weeks, carrying signs. 9 weeks. This is during the summer in Los Angeles slash Burbank, so it's hot and exhausting, even for all of these young artists in their 20s and 30s. And fast forward those 9 weeks, they won. They got the union they wanted, but in that whole process, it caused a lot of ill will and bitterness. And some people never spoke to their friends who were on the opposite side of that fight ever again. So it was unfortunate that it was so bitter. It was unfortunate that it was so long. And it was unfortunate that it wasn't discussed for like 80 years. And that people who had contributed so much to Disney as an art form and then took leadership roles in the strike, they were kind of forgotten. And specifically, who I'm talking about is this animator named Art Babbitt. Art Babbitt was what I discovered to be the most innovative artist at the Disney studios, like bringing in all these great new ideas that propelled Disney animation upwards. Um, he brought in figure drawing classes and like art school classes into the studio. He brought in the use of using a camera for live action reference to inform their animation. He brought in the using of method acting to dissect the characters' minds. And he was also a supervising animator and the creator slash um, he wouldn't call himself the creator of Goofy, but he was sort of the person who was the father of who we know of as Goofy, moving Goofy up from like a background character to like one of the core characters. So he was just hugely, hugely influential at Disney. And then he became a leader of this labor strike. And because of that, all of these contributions were sort of brushed under the rug for a long time. Um, and I wanted to sort of like honor his name without making this a good versus bad story, because I love Disney and I love unions generally as a concept. And so this can't be like evil versus good. This isn't like Darth Vader versus um, Luke Skywalker. This is about two different sides with different ideals, and the bitterness was unnecessary, but they each had reasons for following the paths that they chose. And that's what I wrote about. The people who endorsed the book, who wrote on the back of the book, "This is a great book," and all that stuff, are many of them are Disney people. I have Don Hahn, Mindy Johnson, Pete Docter, John Canemaker, Andreas Deja, Eric Goldberg. All these people are like Didier Guez. These people have firm ties with Disney who read the book and found its value. Tom Cito.
The
So
guys I've had
I
on.
so this is not anti-Disney at all. And I wanted to just research it deep, 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 deep dive using primary sources and no anecdotal references where at all possible. Just go deep, find newspaper articles, journals, um, like people's diaries, letters people wrote, court transcripts, like things from that time that told of what happened, rather than interviews from old men and women looking back. I did not want old people's interviews who had decades of feelings to color their memories. I wanted to go back to the source. And so all of my sources for the strike are dated in or around the time of the strike.
Wow.
Yeah, it took a long time. It took more than 10 years to do.
Oh man, I can't even imagine because like I know that there's a lot of research that went into this book. So yeah, just had to talk to so many people, and then there's also like, the amount of accuracy that is involved here. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of homework that you had to do for this one.
Yeah, if any readers, I put so much free research online. If anyone wants to read the court transcripts or look at some of the flyers that the Disney strikers hand deliver to people during that time, they can go to thedisneyrevolt.com and they can see at no cost to them all or the majority of the research, definitely the best bits of the research that I was able to uncover in my years of finding this story. They can find a day by day calendar of what happened. They can find a bunch of handbills and memos from the Disney studio that were in public library collections. They can find the transcripts of the Disney directors and Walt testifying about the strike. All that on the disneyrevolt.com. And if any listeners want to buy the book at a discount, y'all get a 25% discount if you go to the publisher's website, which is chicagoreviewpress.com, and use discount code Disney25. Boom.
Nice. So if I were to give my like own thought, or like if I have my own 2 cents on the strike, it Like, I mean, it is especially relevant even now because with a lot of with everything that's been going on with like, studios and companies that are I mean, especially in the case of like, with animators just pushing for more of a union, status after, recent events that have been going on with like layoffs and yeah, it's rather depressing. I'd rather not get into that. But yeah, for this one, it was kind of revolutionary. I mean, I remember like reading that other animation studios were joining the strike. They
Mhm.
had support from other like Warner Brothers and
Yeah,
so on and so forth. So it
yeah,
was just
yeah,
a pretty
yeah.
crazy, yeah, Chuck Jones. Like it was a really
Chuck
crazy
Jones
time.
led those guys. He led
Yeah.
the group of Warner Brothers artists. He was Chuck Jones was the head of the Warner Brothers branch of the Cartoon Union. So Art Babbitt was the head of the Disney branch. Chuck Jones was the head of the Warner Brothers branch, and their boss, Leon Schlesinger, would give them a little bit of time off at the end of each day to prepare to participate in the strike. And the Warner Brothers folks were building all these crazy floats and making crazy signs and donating food and really making it 10 times more of a spectacle, kind of the way that you would imagine like the wily characters of like Bugs and Daffy would if they were to participate in a strike. Like anything to stick it to the man.
Yeah, it was insane. Like, I think after this strike, after Disney finally went ahead and, just caved in and did it, it was not the same, unfortunately, because like you said, it was bitterness and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of artists would end up leaving Disney, and it was, yeah, like the
Yeah.
magic that was in the like when you watch something like let me see Snow White and then you watch like Cinderella or the later Disney films, like the difference, I'm gonna say there's like difference in quality, but like just the fact that you could obviously tell that um because when Disney had a lot more employees and there was more like, oh, and there was, I think there was also the fact that like, Disney was focusing on, his theme parks and the live action stuff, and he wasn't really as involved in animation as much as he was before. The strike happened, so that probably might be, there's a lot of contributing factors, but I think those are just kind of you know, my I guess reasons as to why the Disney films weren't really as like they just really didn't have the spark that was present in like when you watch Dumbo or Bambi or those movies. At
Yeah.
least for me though. I know it's different for everyone. I know people really do enjoy like the Jungle Book, and there's
Mm-hmm.
other films that I really do like from the 50s and 60s. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
after Walt Disney unfortunately passed, the studio was struggling for a very long time. And then,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, the 80s rolled around and 90s, and then things were starting to get back on top. We're starting to, Disney was back at the top of the game. So they
Yeah.
almost went out of business like in the 80s, believe it or not. But
Mm-hmm.
at least they're still around and doesn't look like they're stopping or slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah.
Which brings me, speaking of the 80s and 90s, the Disney afternoon, the making
Yeah.
of a television renaissance.
Yeah. 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 That book is scheduled to come out next year, 2024.
Nice.
We started that, I think, back in 2018. And it was all researched and written, and um, a stage or two of layout was completed, and a round or two of editing, and then COVID hit, and so it was kind of put on pause, and it's been sitting in pause, in that state of pause for a little bit. So uh, I'm excited as much as anyone for it to come out. And I know that people really want to pick up this book and see the stories and read the interviews and see some of this art that no one has ever seen before. And I can't be more thrilled to share with them. And I guess I'll see everyone in 2024, the fall of that year when it's scheduled to come out.
Yeah, and who knows? We may do a part two, and by the time it's closer to the release date.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You know how to find
Yeah.
me.
Oh, sure thing. Yeah, and you also did other books like Walt's People, Snow White, An American Experience, and also you've done. I mean, to tie you over, you can also look at the art of Blue Sky Studios, and also not just cartoons, Nicktoons. So at least you have those to tie you over before we get the Disney after we relieve the renaissance of the Disney afternoon.
Well, just to give credit where it's due, it was Jerry Beck who wrote the
Oh
Nicktoons book.
yeah.
I was just his assistant on that.
Oh,
Um,
totally. Yeah.
and the Blue Sky book I wrote. I did not write Walt's People. I just wrote the foreword for I think the 17th volume of Walt's People. Um, and I think it's in that foreword that I sort of like talk about how I want to humanize Walt Disney, and that makes him all the more remarkable, which I hope I did with the Disney Revolt.
Hmm.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
so if readers want to see what you're looking at, they can go to my website which is jakesfriedman.com. And I don't know how interesting it is, but they can see what I've been up to.
Right. Yeah. Well, I gotta mention Blue Sky because, like, after what happened and everything. So, yeah,
Yeah.
um, buy the book and, enjoy how most of these movies are made and you know, just as a way to appreciate them for the time and what they did, how they contributed to the animation industry, the art form and stuff. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and I hope people enjoy the Disney Revolt because it's an underdog
Yeah.
story. And if people like a good underdog story that also includes, like, I want to say, evil viziers, like the vice president of the Disney company was kind of the mastermind of the whole thing, was the mastermind of the strike, or mafia influence, which also plays a part in the book. Um,
That's a good one.
yeah, they might enjoy it. I wrote the book kind of as like a narrative to make it feel like it's a story, like a beginning to end story. I because I've been teaching college classes for several years, I wanted to write a book that could communicate this to a college student. I kind of pictured like an 18-year-old with a short attention span at the other end of this book. So it's for that reason that I tried to really frame it as an interesting story from beginning to end. And that's what people tell me I was able to do. So hopefully your listeners will agree.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to share? Like I know we got the Disney Renaissance that is coming out soon, but anything else that you want to share or plug before we officially conclude for today's special episode?
Oh, no, I think we've hit upon everything. Um,
Yeah.
as long as the memory of Art Babbitt keeps going, I think that's really the most important thing. I think his contributions and his story are worth telling. And um, although the Disney strike has been written about uh, in in other books, um, most of those other books either kind of like speed through it and sort of like give general ideas of what happened, um, and they use anecdotal reference from people who are like remembering it 30 years before. And in respect to people on both sides, people who were pro company and people who were pro union, I wanted to tell as complete a story as I possibly could. So between the research I put in and the effort to make it a story that reads well with a kind of immediacy that allows the reader to fall into it, like you're right there in it. Um, those were my top two priorities for the Disney Revolt. So anyone who wants to time travel back to the golden age of animation, which you were kind enough to elucidate, that Snow White, Pinocchio, Dumbo, Fantasia, Bambi, those are the films that encompass the golden age of Disney, and you're 100% right. Like something changed after that era, and this strike is part of what changed.
Yeah. Totally. Um, Let me see. Any last words, like any last piece of advice that you want to close out on?
Any piece of advice?
Yeah.
Um, um, always do right. This will gratify some people and astonish the rest. Mark Twain said that first.
Yeah, let's go with that. Chuck Jones' favorite
Oh,
author, so
that's true.
bookend. Yeah,
That's true.
that's a nice little bookend there. So, yeah, where can people find, where can we, see you? Like, do you have what's your website, social media, where people can follow you and, check out your work and stuff? Yeah, social media plugs.
Social media plugs. My website, Jake S. Friedman. That's Friedman, Friedman.com. If they want to check out more info on this book, there's a ton of just really cool stuff about the book um, at the DisneyRevolt.com. And if people want to follow me on the Twitters or the Instagrams, they can just do at Jake S. Friedman. Make sure they put the middle initial there. Jake S
Alrighty.
as in Sam. Although my
Yeah.
middle name is not Sam, but that's it. Jake S. Friedman on Twitters and Instagrams.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Any last words, or I think we pretty much just covered everything.
Yeah, yeah. How about
Yeah.
you? Um, what do you want um people to take from like the golden age of animation? Why is that so important for people to know in your opinion?
It's
Now
so
I kind of want to know.
Yeah, it's so important because I want people to know that what they've done in the golden age, that is something that we can study and be inspired by because and also when you look at how animation and technology had advanced so much over these last like 80 or so years, it's important to look back and just recognize the accomplishments that a lot of these animators and artists, directors that they gave us so we can learn and we can just move towards a better future. Like what they've done, like it's best to be inspired by it. It is also important to take this new technology, we expand upon it, and we continue to build towards an even bigger, brighter, and a more like um optimistic future. At least that's what I like to know. I mean, as they say, you can't beat the classics for pretty good reason. So I like to abide with that, mindset. I mean, I subscribe to that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know everyone's different, but yeah, everybody has opinions. But regardless, thanks for the question, by the way. That was wow. But I really do appreciate that. And I do appreciate your time. And check out this in full interview on my YouTube channel whenever it's posted. If not today, then certainly over the weekend. And regardless, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Peace out, y'all. Bye.